Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I am so glad you're here with us today. We are unpacking something absolutely crucial, looking at how certain nations actually structure their rule and organize their power. We constantly hear terms thrown around like national government or central authority, but how do these systems really function at their core? Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of a unitary government. By the time we wrap up, you're going to have a crystal clear understanding of the exact mechanics running some of the most powerful nations on Earth.
But before we throw textbook definitions at you, just ponder this for a second. Where does supreme power actually live in a nation? Think about it. When a massive, course-altering decision needs to be made, or a final law needs to be enacted, who truly holds that ultimate, untouchable authority? Does it sit with your local mayor, your regional governor, or does it all funnel up to one single desk in a distant capital city? The answer to that question literally shapes the daily lives of millions of citizens.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, defining unitary government. Second, the mechanics of central power. Third, the advantages of centralization. Fourth, the drawbacks of centralization. And finally, unitary governments in action.
Okay, let's dive right into this with Part 1, defining unitary government and the foundation of centralized power.
So, the formal textbook definition is that a unitary government is a form of government in which all constitutional powers are vested in a single central authority. And I really want to emphasize that word all here. In this system, every single ounce of constitutional power is completely funneled into one central hub. It doesn't mean local offices don't exist at all, but it absolutely means the foundational ultimate power belongs entirely to the center.
Actually, let's distill that definition down to its absolute simplest core, just to make sure we're perfectly aligned before moving on. All constitutional powers in a single central authority. That right there is the golden rule of a unitary state. There is no sharing of sovereignty going on here. There's no dividing the constitutional pie into equal slices. The central authority just holds the entire pie.
And as you'd imagine, this creates a really specific, almost top-heavy power dynamic. While the central authority is vested with all that constitutional power, the local governments, they only get to exercise the specific powers granted to them by that center. And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Those local governments can be altered or even completely abolished by the central government at any time. They exist entirely at the absolute mercy of the central authority.
Moving right along to Section 2, the mechanics of central power, or basically how this whole system actually operates day to day. When we break down the authority and control, we see a totally clear, unambiguous hierarchy. The first major feature is that a single central authority holds supreme power. And flowing directly from that, local governments operate completely under the control of that central government. Authority in a unitary system is pretty simple. It flows only in one direction, downward. It never bubbles up from the regions to dictate terms to the top. The control is absolute.
Now, let's look at the real-world operational impact of that downward flow. Because power is entirely centralized, uniform laws and policies are applied throughout the entire country. There's no messy patchwork of different laws across different regions. What is legal in the north is exactly the same as what is legal in the south. Furthermore, because you aren't waiting around for dozens of different regional legislatures to agree on something, decision-making is usually incredibly quick and efficient. The center decides, and boom, the nation adopts it.
Now, a quick aside on constitutions. We know nations have different types of constitutions, right? Some are very flexible and easy to update, while others are incredibly rigid and hard to amend. But in a unitary system, it kind of doesn't matter. Whether the constitution bends easily or stands firm, sovereignty, that supreme overarching authority, always remains tightly held by the central government. It just never leaves the center.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and look at Section 3, the advantages of centralization and the benefits of unity.
To be completely objective here, the advantages of this centralization are quite powerful. First up, faster decision-making. We just touched on this, but think about it as a huge advantage during a crisis. A single central authority naturally eliminates all that bureaucratic red tape, allowing for rapid, decisive choices. Secondly, it fosters incredibly strong national unity. When everyone in the country lives under the exact same policies and laws, it actively cultivates a singular, unified national identity.
And because of this uniform administration and uniform law, you naturally end up with significantly less conflict between national and local governments. This is a massive benefit of the system. Think about it. You aren't going to have endless legal battles between a regional governor and the central president, mostly because that regional governor doesn't even have the independent constitutional authority to pick a fight with the center in the first place.
But of course, no system is perfect. Let's transition to Section 4, the drawbacks of centralization and the cost of control.
So, what are the trade-offs? Well, the first major disadvantage is ignored local needs. Centralized decisions made hundreds of miles away may totally overlook the unique interests of a specific region. Imagine your own hometown being governed entirely by leaders who've literally never even visited it. The second drawback is excessive centralization. There is always a big risk that simply too much power becomes concentrated in one place, which really limits your checks and balances. And finally, less autonomy. Regional governments simply lack the true independence needed to innovate or govern themselves according to their own local culture.
I actually want to pause and focus heavily on this specific quote straight from the source text. May ignore local needs and interests. This right here perfectly encapsulates the primary tension of the unitary system. While the nation as a whole might move fast and efficiently, the specific unique needs of a local farming community or, say, a coastal fishing town might be entirely swept aside by a broad, one-size-fits-all policy drafted in a distant capital city.
Let's ground this theory in reality with our final section, unitary government in action.
Take a look at these major global players, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, China. These are nations with vastly different cultures, completely different economies, and different political ideologies, yet they all utilize a unitary form of government. This really demonstrates just how incredibly common and deeply impactful this form of government is. It's not just some abstract theory, it's the literal operating software for some of the most prominent nations on the globe.
Now, what's really interesting about the United Kingdom is a fascinating bit of nuance. The UK is largely unitary, though some powers are devolved. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that while London holds the ultimate constitutional authority, they willingly delegate, or devolve, certain specific powers to regions like Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But keeping strict with our definition, because the UK is unitary, the central government technically retains the supreme power to alter or just totally revoke those devolved powers at any given time.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. Is the speed of centralized decision-making worth the sacrifice of local autonomy? That is the real core tug-of-war we've been exploring. A unitary government offers unparalleled efficiency, unified laws, and rapid action, for sure. But the cost is definitely paid by local communities who have to surrender their independence to a central hub. As you look at global events unfold, keep this governmental structure in mind. Ask yourself how a nation's foundational setup dictates how they respond to the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll see you next time.